It started so subtly that I almost missed it entirely. My wife Emma had always been the steady kind, the kind of partner who had her routines and stuck to them. We've been married for years. And if I'm honest, life had settled into a predictable rhythm. Sunday afternoons were her therapy days. Therapy was her way of decompressing, dealing with the weight of life, or so I thought. It had always been once a week, just an hour on Sundays, but then it started creeping into other days, a session here, a session there. By the time I really took notice, she was going to therapy 3, sometimes 4 times a week. First I was happy for her. Whatever she was working on seemed to be helping. Emma was glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her laughter came easier, her mood lighter. But then something changed. She became distant. Her phone became a second appendage, always with her, always locked. She'd step out to take calls, always brushing off my questions with a quick "it's just a friend from work." I tried not to overthink it, but when I found myself sitting alone in bed while she spent hours in sessions, my curiosity grew into something darker. Doubt it was late one Tuesday when the urge to confront this gnawing suspicion finally overcame me. Therapy had been Emma's sacred space, a place I respected, but the secrecy around it was suffocating. I decided I needed to meet her psychologist, Dr. Gregory Lang. I made up my mind next Sunday I'd pay his office a visit. The decision to confront Dr. Lang wasn't one I made lightly. In fact, I agonized over it for days. The whole idea seemed invasive, disrespectful even, but something deep in my gut told me there was more to this therapy than Emma was letting on. That Sunday I woke up early, the anxiety twisting in my stomach like a bad meal. Emma had already left for her session. She kissed me on the forehead before leaving, a gesture that once felt intimate but now carried a coldness I couldn't ignore. Her lips barely brushed my skin. "See you in a couple of hours," she had said, smiling with the kind of ease that made me feel like the fool. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my jacket and headed for Dr. Lang's office. It wasn't far, a modest space tucked into a strip mall a few miles from our house. I parked my car across the lot and sat there for what felt like forever, staring at the beige facade of the building, trying to summon the courage to walk in. My plan was simple: ask Dr. Lang some questions, get a feel for what was going on. Maybe I'd discover that my suspicions were just the product of an overactive imagination. Maybe Emma really was just dealing with something she couldn't share with me yet. Or maybe I'd get the confirmation I dreaded. The waiting room was as bland as you'd expect, with beige walls, a couple of fake plants, and a stack of magazines that hadn't been touched in years. The receptionist looked up from her desk and gave me a polite but questioning smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. I hesitated, my palms slick with sweat. "I'm here to see Dr. Lang," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's about my wife Emma. She's a patient of his." Her smile faltered. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's important," I insisted. "Just a quick word. I won't take up much of his time." The receptionist frowned but picked up the phone, speaking in hushed tones before hanging up. "Hune with a client right now," she said, "but if you'd like I can see if he can speak with you once the session is over." "That would be great," I said, nodding. My heart was pounding as I took A seat in the corner of the room. The minutes ticked by, each one felt like an eternity. I tried not to look at the clock, but my eyes kept drifting to it. The waiting room was silent except for the occasional shuffle of papers from the receptionist's desk. Then I heard it, a muffled sound coming from down the hall. It was faint but unmistakable laughter, a man's voice, deep and smooth, followed by a softer, higher-pitched one that I knew all too well. Emma, I froze. My heart thudded against my rib cage as the voices grew louder, still muffled but animated. The receptionist didn't seem to notice. She was typing something into her computer, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. What was she laughing about? And why did it sound so intimate, so carefree, the kind of laughter she hadn't shared with me in months? The door at the end of the hallway opened suddenly, and there she was, Emma. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, her smile wide. For a brief moment I forgot my anger, caught off guard by how stunning she, in her tone that struck me. I didn't know whether to follow her, yell after her, or let her go. The part of me that wanted answers felt like it was in a tug of war with the part that wanted to crumble on the spot, but I wasn't giving up, not yet. I turned back toward Drawer Lang's office. The receptionist raised an eyebrow as I marched past her desk without so much as a glance. I didn't knock when I reached the door at the end of the hall. I just opened it and stepped inside. Dr. Lang was standing near his desk, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He didn't look surprised to see me, which only fueled my anger. Mr. Turner, he said calmly, this is highly irregular. Yeah, so is what's going on between you and my wife, I shot back, slamming the door behind me. He blinked, but his expression remained unreadable. I think you're misunderstanding the situation. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, I'm misunderstanding, huh? Then help me understand, doctor. Help me understand why my wife is spending all her free time with you, why she looks at you like I stopped myself before the words came out, but the implication hung in the air. Between us, I understand your frustration, he said, his voice infuriatingly calm. But Emma, is my patient what you're suggesting is unethical and what untrue? I snapped, stepping closer, because from where I'm standing it looks pretty damn suspicious. His expression hardened, but his tone remained measured. I can't discuss Emma's sessions with you, Mr. Turner. I'm bound by confidentiality. Spare me the professional ethics speech, I said, my fists clenched at my sides. You're supposed to help her, not I. Broke off, my voice catching. Not ruin our marriage. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering his next words carefully. I assure you my only priority is Emma's well-being. If you want to know why she's been coming here more often, perhaps you should ask her. I did, I shouted, my frustration boiling over. And you know what she did? She walked away, just like you're trying to do right now. Dove tightened. For the first time I saw a crack in his composure. He sighed and moved to sit in the chair behind his desk. Mr. Turner, he said slowly, if you care about Emma, then trust her. Therapy can be a deeply personal and challenging process. Sometimes it requires space from loved ones. Space, I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call it when she spends hours here lying to me about where she is, laughing with you like I stopped The words choking me. You're hurting, he said quietly, his voice so gentle it almost made me snap. I get it, I've seen this before, but jumping to conclusions will only push her further away. The room was silent for a moment. My hands were still trembling, and I realized I'd been gripping the back of one of his chairs so hard my knuckles had turned white. I let go and straightened, trying to regain some semblance of control. You want me to trust her? I asked finally, my voice low. Then prove I have a reason to. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. What do you want from me, Mr. Turner? I want the truth, I said, because right now all I see is a man who's too close to my wife, and if you've crossed a line. He stood abruptly, cutting me off. I haven't, he said firmly, his calm demeanor giving way to something sharper. And I won't tolerate baseless accusations. Baseless? I laughed bitterly. You don't think I see the way she looks at you, or how you look at her? For a split second something flickered across his face. Guilt maybe, or recognition, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He sighed again and walked to the door, opening it wide. I think we're done here, he said. His tone was even, but there was an edge to it. Now go home, Mr. Turner. Talk to your wife, and if you can't resolve this on your own, consider seeking therapy yourself. I stared at him, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to argue, to demand answers, to break him the way I felt broken, but instead I turned and walked out, the sound of the door clicking shut behind me feeling like a final nail in the coffin. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. Emma's car was gone. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do before heading back to my own car. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, doubt, and something I couldn't quite name. As I started the engine, a single thought consumed me. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Dr. Lang might have been calm, composed, even convincing, but something about the way he'd reacted, the slight crack in his armor, the flicker of something in his eyes, told me I wasn't wrong, and if I had to dig to find the truth, so be it. That I drove home in silence, the low hum of the engine the only sound. Articles about mindfulness, but then I saw it, an address I didn't recognize. Clicked on. Just days ago it was a small notation buried among dozens of other entries, but it stood out like a neon sign. A quick search revealed it was a hotel, a boutique place in the city, the kind of place you'd go for a romantic getaway. My stomach sank as I stared at the screen, the implications hitting me like a freight train. Why was she looking at hotels, and why hadn't she mentioned it? I jotted down the address and slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing. If she'd been there, there might still be a record. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew I couldn't let this go. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, determined to find out more. The hotel was a short drive from our house, tucked away on a quiet street. It was charming, with warm light spilling from the windows and a small courtyard out front, the kind of place Emma would have loved once when we were still happy. I parked a block away and walked to the entrance, my nerves jangling. The lobby was small but elegant, with a marble counter and plush armchairs. A man in his late s stood behind the front desk, scrolling through something on a tablet. I approached cautiously, my mind racing with excuses. "Good evening," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm trying to track down my wife. She might Have been here recently but I can't seem to reach her. Could you help me check the man looked up, his expression polite but wary. What's her name? Emma Turner, I said. He tapped at the tablet, frowning slightly. I don't see a reservation under that name. Maybe she checked in under someone else's name. I pressed, trying not to sound too desperate. It's really important. He hesitated, glancing at me before returning to his screen. I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out guest information unless they're listed on the reservation. Please, I said, leaning in. I'm not looking for trouble. I just need to know if she's okay. The man sighed, clearly uncomfortable. He tapped again, then looked up. The only thing I can tell you is that someone matching her description was here days ago. She wasn't alone. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Who was she with? He shook his head. I'm sorry, I can't share that. My hands curled into fists at my sides, but I forced myself to nod. Thank you, I said, tightly turning and walking out before I said something I'd regret. Back in the car, I sat in stunned silence. She wasn't alone. Of course she wasn't alone, and there was only one person I could think of who would have been with her. Do Al. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. If this was true, if she'd gone to a hotel with him, what did that mean for us, for our marriage? I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was piling up, and if I was going to confront her again, I needed more than suspicions. I needed undeniable proof. Tomorrow I would find it. That I hardly slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of Emma laughing with Dr. Lang flashed behind my eyelids. The way her cheeks had flushed, the way his hand lingered just a second too long on her back, it all replayed in a loop, fueling the storm in my chest. When I finally gave up on sleep, I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. As I stared into the dark, I knew I couldn't confront her directly. Not yet. She'd either deny it, twist the narrative, or shut me out completely. If I wanted answers, I needed to play it smart. I decided to follow her. The idea left a sour taste in my mouth. Spying on my wife felt like crossing a line one I never imagined I'd need to consider. But if she was lying to me, if she was betraying everything we built together, I deserved to know. Emma came home late that night. While past midnight, I was already in bed pretending to sleep. She slipped into the room quietly, but I could hear the slight shuffle of her feet, the hesitation in her movements. I kept my breathing steady, resisting the urge to roll over and confront her. In the morning she acted like everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out the door, her smile bright but brittle like a mask she'd practiced wearing. I've got errands to run after work, she said casually. Don't wait up, I nodded, biting back the questions bubbling in my throat. She left without a second glance. I waited an hour before heading out. I didn't want to follow too closely, didn't want her to notice anything unusual. I knew her schedule well enough, where she worked her usual routes, but today felt different. She wasn't headed to her office or any of her usual haunts. My gut told me this was another session with Dr. Lang. I parked a block away from his office, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the building her car was. Finally the door opened and she stepped outside. She wasn't alone. Dr. Lang followed her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. They spoke briefly. Too far away for me to hear before she got into her car. He leaned against the door frame, watching as she drove away. My blood boiled. I waited until she was out of sight before getting out of my car and heading toward him. He didn't notice me, at first too preoccupied with whatever thoughts were swimming in his head. When I was close enough to cast a shadow, he looked up. "Mr. Turner," he said, startled. His composed demeanor from before was gone, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like guilt. "Dr. Lang," I said, evenly, though my voice trembled with barely restrained anger. "I think it's time we had a real conversation. I already told you I'm not here to accuse you," I interrupted. "I'm here for the truth. You owe me that much." He hesitated, his jaw tightening for a moment. I thought he might tell me to leave, but then he sighed and stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "Minutes," he said, "that's all I can give you." His office was exactly what I expected. "Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference." "Thank you." Tasteful minimalist, designed to put people at ease, but I felt anything but calm as I sat across from him, my hands clenched into fists on my lap. "You're crossing a line, Mr. Turner," he said after a moment, his voice low. "This isn't how therapy works. This isn't about therapy anymore," I said sharply. "I know Emma was here today. I saw her leave, so why don't we cut the act and talk about what's really going on?" He rubbed a hand over his face, looking uncharacteristically weary. "Emma is struggling," he said finally. "Sheck, dealing with things she hasn't shared with you, and she's asked me to keep those things private." "That's convenient," I said bitterly. "You can hide behind patient confidentiality while my marriage falls apart." "I'm not hiding," he shot back, his voice hardening. "And you don't understand the full picture then. Explain it to me," I demanded, "because from where I'm standing the full picture looks like my wife spending hours with you instead of coming home to me." His eyes flicked away, and for a split second I saw something there: doubt, hesitation. "I can't give you the details," he said carefully, "but I can tell you this much. Emma's been trying to make sense of her feelings about herself, about your marriage. It's complicated, I repeated. "Is that what you call sneaking around, lying to my face?" "It's not what you think," he said, his voice firm, but there was a crack in his composure, and I seized on it. "Then why are you so defensive?" I shot back. "If nothing's going on, why does it feel like you're hiding something?" He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally he stood, signaling the end of our conversation. "I can't help you, Mr. Turner," he said quietly, "but I hope you can find a way to help yourself and Emma." I stood to, my anger bubbling over. "If I find out you've crossed the line with her," I said, my voice low and deadly. "Yook regretted." His expression didn't change, but I saw his hand tighten on the edge of the desk. Without another word I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I sat in my car for a long time, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. His words had done nothing to ease my fears. If anything, they confirmed what I already knew. Something was happening between him and Emma, and I was going to find out exactly what. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my mind replaying every word of my conversation with Dr. Lang. His calm facade had cracked just enough to show me there was more going on than he was letting on. But what was he just protecting Emma, or was he protecting himself. By the time I got home, the house was still empty. Emma hadn't returned. I checked her location. Again, nothing. The tracker was still off. Another silent confirmation that something wasn't right. My thoughts spiraled as I paced the living room. Every shadow in the room feeling like it was closing in. I needed proof, and I had an idea where to find it. Emma wasn't careless, but she wasn't meticulous either. If she was hiding something, there had to be a trail: text messages, emails, receipts. Something. I started in the bedroom, felt invasive, digging through her things, but I convinced myself it was necessary. I checked the usual places. First, her nightstand, her dresser, the closet. Nothing stood out. Everything was perfectly normal, as if the woman I'd been married to for years hadn't been slowly slipping away from me. Then I remembered her purse. I'd always thought of Emma's purse as a black hole, a mysterious void where keys, chapstick, and romantic getaways. By noon, I was parked outside the hotel, staring at its modern facade through my windshield. I had no plan, no idea what I was hoping to accomplish, but sitting at home stewing in my own suspicions had been unbearable. The lobby was just as polished as I'd expected. Muted tones, sleek furniture, soft jazz playing in the background. A young woman with a name tag that R. Sophie greeted me at the front desk. "Welcome to the Harbor View," and she said with a bright smile, "How can I help you today?" My stomach churned as I stepped closer. "Hi, I was hoping to check if someone stayed here recently," I said, keeping my tone as casual as possible. "I think my wife might have left something behind during her visit." Her smile faltered slightly, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face. "Do you have the reservation name or room number?" "Emma Turner," I said quickly. "She might have been here a couple of days ago." She typed the name into her computer, her nails clicking softly against the keyboard. I held my breath, waiting for her response. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. "I don't see anyone by that name." I forced a smile. "She might have been a guest of someone else. Could you check again? It's really important." She hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was watching. "I can't give out guest information," she said finally, her tone apologetic. "It's against our policy." I nodded, swallowing my frustration. "Of course I understand," but as I turned to leave, my gaze caught something on the counter, a stack of invoices, one partially visible beneath a clipboard. My heart leapt as I recognized the name at the top. Dr. Gregory Lang. I froze, staring at the paper. The logo of the Harbor View Inn was printed neatly in the corner, along with a date, days ago. "Is something wrong?" Sophie asked, her brow furrowing. "No," I said quickly, stepping away from the counter. "Thanks for your help." I sat in my car, staring at the hotel, the weight of the discovery settling over me. He'd been here with her. The pieces were falling into place, each one more damning than the last. Emma's secrecy, her late nights, the way she'd been pulling away from me, it all pointed to this. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. Thank you. But I wasn't done yet. I needed more than suspicions, more than a hotel key card and an invoice. I needed undeniable proof, and I knew exactly how to get it. That night I set up camera. Felt wrong, sneaky, invasive, but my trust had already been shattered, and I couldn't live with the not knowing. I placed one in the living room, another in the kitchen, and a third in the bedroom. Hidden in the corner where it wouldn't be noticed if Emma was hiding something. I would catch it as I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling. I wondered what I would do if I was right. What would I say to her, to him? Could I forgive her if she admitted the truth? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered as I drifted into a restless sleep. The cameras sat like silent sentinels in my home, each one holding the promise or threat of answers. The setup had taken me hours, my hands trembling as I adjusted the angles and hid the devices. As much as I hated what I was doing, I couldn't stop the lies, and secrecy had left me no choice. The next morning Emma was already gone. When I woke up, her car wasn't in the driveway, and she hadn't left a note. I checked my phone, no messages, no updates on her location. I made coffee, staring at the mug in my hands as the minutes ticked by. Every sound in the house seemed amplified in the silence. By noon my nerves were frayed. I needed to know what was happening, what she was doing. I retrieved the first memory card from the living room camera. My fingers shook as I inserted it into my laptop. The file opened and the playback began. At first there was nothing unusual. Emma moved through the living room, tidying up and answering a call. Her voice was soft and I couldn't make out the words. I fast forwarded the screen, flickering as the hours passed. Then she reappeared. She was on the couch holding her phone, her expression focused. I slowed the playback, watching as she typed out a message. Her lips moved slightly as if she were murmuring the words aloud. The message sent, and she leaned back, her eyes lingering on the screen. A faint smile tugged at her lips. My chest tightened. The next video I checked was from the bedroom camera. I didn't expect to find much. Emma rarely spent time there during the day, but I pressed play anyway. The first few minutes were uneventful. Then the door opened and she walked in, her phone in hand. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen. This time I caught part of the conversation. Can you come over? She whispered. He's gone for the day. I paused the video, my heart pounding. Who was she talking to? I fast forwarded again, the hours blurring into seconds. Nothing happened. The room stayed empty for a moment. I felt a flicker of relief until I saw her reappear, accompanied by someone else. Him. Dong. My hands clenched into fists as I watched the screen. The two of them stood in the bedroom, their conversation muffled by the distance. Emma looked at him with a softness I hadn't seen in months. Her body angled toward him like he was the center of her world. He reached out, his hand brushing her arm. She didn't pull away. I slammed the laptop shut. The image seared into my mind. My worst fear had been confirmed. They weren't just having an affair, they were flaunting it right here in my home. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't think about anything but what I'd seen. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How could she betray me like this? By the time Emma came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room. The sight of her walking through the door, her expression serene, sent a wave of anger crashing through me. Hey, she said, setting her back down. You're home early. I didn't answer. She hesitated, sensing the tension. Is everything okay? No, I said flatly, her brow furrowed. What's wrong? I stood, my hands trembling at my sides. Where were you today, Emma? She blinked, caught off guard by the Question I had errands why don't lie to me I said my voice rising I know where you were I know who you were with her. Face ped Jack you brought him here I said my voice cracking into our home. Into our bedroom her mouth opened but no sound came out how could you do this I demanded how could you throw everything away for him tears welled in her eyes. And she shook her head it's not what you think don't I snapped don't stand there and tell me I didn't just see you with him I set up cameras Emma I know her. Eyes widened and she took a step back her hands trembling you spied on me don't turn this on me I said. You're the one who lied you're the one who betrayed me she looked away her shoulders slumping I'm sorry she whispered sorry I repeated my voice breaking that's all you have to say she didn't answer the silence stretched between us heavy and suffocating finally. I turned away able to look at her any longer I don't know who you are anymore. I said quietly but I can't do this not with you I walked out of the room leaving her standing there her tears falling silently I sat in my car for what felt like hours gripping the steering wheel tightly my knuckles turned white support the channel by subscribing it really makes a difference. Thank you the house loomed behind me silent and for both but I couldn't go back inside not yet not while the memory of Emma's tearful confession played on an endless loop in my mind I couldn't shake the look in her eyes guilt mixed with something else regret maybe or worse the absence of it. When I finally drove off I didn't have a destination in mind the streets were dark the city quiet except for the occasional hum of passing cars my phone buzzed on the passenger seat but I ignored it I knew it was Emma I couldn't bear to hear her voice I ended up at a park we used to visit in the early days of our marriage it was a quiet place with a small pond and a cluster of benches overlooking the water we used to sit here for hours talking about everything and nothing dreaming about the life we wanted to build together now. It felt like a monument to something long dead the first message came an hour later Emma Jack please come home we need to talk. I didn't respond the next one came shortly after Emma I know you're angry but I need you to let me explain. What was there to explain I had seen everything I needed to see I leaned back against the bench staring at the rippling water my thoughts spiraled in a thousand directions none of them leading to answers how had we gotten here had I been blind to her unhappiness or had she simply chosen to hide it from me I thought about life she hesitated her gaze dropping to the floor it started with therapy she said quietly I was struggling with us with myself and Dr. Lang helped me see things more clearly he helped me feel understood I repeated bitterly that's what this was about you didn't feel understood by your husband so you ran to him it wasn't like that at first she insisted I didn't intend for it to become anything more but somewhere along the way she trailed off her voice breaking I stared at her my chest heaving did you sleep with him I asked finally my voice barely above a whisper her silence was deafening the room felt like it was collapsing around me I took a step back my hands shaking Jack she said reaching for me please don't I said pulling away don't touch me her face crumpled and she sank onto the couch her sobs filling the silence I turned and walked out of the room the weight of her Betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. That night I slept in the guest room, my mind a storm of anger, heartbreak and confusion. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him there. Whispered words and stolen glances. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for certain: our life would never be the same. The morning came too quickly, dragging me from a restless, dreamless sleep that left me feeling as drained as when I'd closed my eyes. The guest room was cold, the pale light filtering through the curtains, doing nothing to ease the ache in my chest. For a moment I lay there staring at the ceiling, hoping that the events of the previous day were just some cruel nightmare. But the weight of the truth settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Emma's sobs, her whispered confession, the silence that screamed louder than words. It was all real. I didn't go downstairs right away. The thought of facing her again felt unbearable, but eventually the smell of coffee wafted up the stairs, pulling me back to reality. I dragged myself out of bed, my body heavy with exhaustion, and headed down to the kitchen. Emma was there, standing at the counter with a mug in her hands. Her back was to me, but she must have heard my footsteps, because she stiffened, her shoulders tensing. Good morning, she said softly, not turning around. I didn't respond. She sighed and turned to face me, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed. Jack, we need to talk. I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms. I think you said enough last night. She flinched, her grip tightening on the mug. I know I hurt you, she said, her voice trembling, and I know I can't undo what I've done, but I need you to know that it wasn't about you. I barked out a bitter laugh. It wasn't about me. You betrayed me. Emma, you betrayed us. How is that not about me? She set the mug down on the counter, her hands trembling. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said. I didn't wake up one day and decide to hurt you. I was lost, Jack. I felt invisible. Invisible, the word stung more than I cared to admit. Do you know what I've done for you? The sacrifices I've made, and you're telling me you felt invisible? Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I'm not excusing what I did, she said. I'm trying to explain it. I've been struggling for a long time, Jack. I didn't know how to tell you, and then Dr. Lang, don't I? Snapped, cutting her off. Don't say his name. She swallowed hard, her tears spilling over. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said, her voice breaking. I never meant to what? Sleep with him? I demanded. Bring him into our home, into our bed. She shook her head, her sobs choking her words. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen. You keep saying that, I said, my voice rising, but you let it happen. Emma, you made a choice. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her head in her hands. I know, she whispered. I know I did, and I hate myself for it. I stared at her, my chest heaving. Part of me wanted to scream, to rage, to tear apart the foundation of everything we'd built, but another part of me, quieter but no less powerful, felt an overwhelming sense of loss. This was the woman I had loved for years, the woman I had built a life with, and now I didn't even recognize her. What do you want from me, Emma? I asked, Finn, my voice hoarse. Do you want me to forgive you? Pretend like none of this happened? Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. Thank you. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. I want to fix this, she said. I want to fix us. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Fix us, Emma? You broke us. You broke me. Her sobs grew louder but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Emma tried to talk to me several more times but I shut her down each time. Sadness and confusion. By the time I returned home it was late. The house was dark except for the light in the living room. Emma was sitting on the couch, her knees drawn to her chest, staring blankly at the television. She looked up as I walked in, her expression a mixture of relief and fear. Jack, she said softly. Standing, I held up a hand, stopping her. I don't want to talk, she nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Again, I'll sleep in the guest room, she said quietly, her voice breaking. I didn't respond that night. As I lay alone in our bed, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. No matter how much I loved Emma, no matter how much I wanted to save what we had, I couldn't see a way forward. She had broken something between us, something I wasn't sure could ever be repaired, and for the first time I started to wonder if it was time to let her go. The next morning I woke up feeling like I'd barely slept. The weight of everything hung heavy in the air, making it hard to breathe. The house was eerily quiet. No sound of Emma's soft footsteps or the clink of her mug against the counter. I sat up, rubbing a hand over my face. Part of me was relieved she wasn't hovering, but another part, the part that still couldn't quite let go, felt the emptiness in her absence. When I finally ventured downstairs, I found a note on the kitchen table. Her handwriting was neat, the letters carefully composed, as if she had spent a long time agonizing over what to say. Jack, I've gone to stay with my sister for a few days. I think we both need some space to figure out what comes next. I'm sorry for everything I've done to hurt you, and I hope you'll believe me when I say I never stopped loving you, Emma. I stared at the note, my emotions wearing between anger, sadness, and an aching hollow. She had left, but not before twisting the knife with those last words. I never stopped loving you. If she loved me, why had she done this? I crumpled the note and tossed it onto the counter, leaning heavily against the sink. My reflection in the window above the faucet startled me. I looked older, more tired, like the weight of the past few days had aged me by years. The day passed in a blur of nothingness. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't distract myself with TV or chores. Everything felt like a reminder of Emma, of the life we built together, and the betrayal that had shattered it. By evening I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer, felt too suffocating, too full of ghosts. I grabbed my keys and left, driving without a destination in mind. I ended up at a bar on the edge of town, a quiet place where no one knew me. The dim lighting and low hum of conversation were a welcome escape from the silence of my thoughts. I ordered a drink, nursing it slowly as I stared at the glass around me. People laughed and talked, their voices blending into an unintelligible buzz. For a moment I envied their normally. Then my phone buzzed on the bar. I glanced at the screen, my stomach tightening when I saw Emma's name. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen before finally swiping to open the message. Emma, I know I've hurt you, but I need you to know the full story. Can we talk? I stared at the message. My emotion is a tangled mess. What more could she possibly say? What full story could make any of this better? I set the phone down, turning back to my drink, but the message lingered in my mind, pulling at me like a thread. I Couldn't quite unravel by the time I finished my second drink. I knew I couldn't ignore her. I needed to hear what she had to say, even if sadness and confusion. By the time I returned home, it was late. The house was dark except for the light in the living room. Emma was sitting on the couch, her knees drawn to her chest, staring blankly at the television. She looked up as I walked in, her expression a mixture of relief and fear. "Jack," she said softly. Standing, I held up a hand, stopping her. "I don't want to talk," she nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. "I'll sleep in the guest room," she said quietly, her voice breaking. I didn't respond that night. As I lay alone in our bed, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. No matter how much I loved Emma, no matter how much I wanted to save what we had, I couldn't see a way forward. She had broken something between us, something I wasn't sure could ever be repaired, and for the first time I started to wonder if it was time to let her go. The next morning I woke up feeling like I'd barely slept. The weight of everything hung heavy in the air, making it hard to breathe. The house was eerily quiet. No sound of Emma's soft footsteps or the clink of her mug against the counter. I sat up, rubbing a hand over my face. Part of me was relieved she wasn't hovering, but another part, the part that still couldn't quite let go, felt the emptiness in her absence. When I finally ventured downstairs, I found a note on the kitchen table. Her handwriting was neat, the letters carefully composed, as if she had spent a long time agonizing over what to say. "Jack, I've gone to stay with my sister for a few days. I think we both need some space to figure out what comes next. I'm sorry for everything I've done to hurt you, and I hope you'll believe me when I say I never stopped loving you, Emma." I stared at the note, my emotions wearing between anger, sadness, and an aching hollow. She had left, but not before twisting the knife with those last words. "I never stopped loving you. If she loved me, why had she done this?" I crumpled the note and tossed it onto the counter, leaning heavily against the sink. My reflection in the window above the faucet startled me. I looked older, more tired, like the weight of the past few days had aged me by years. The day passed in a blur of nothingness. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't distract myself with TV or chores. Everything felt like a reminder of Emma, of the life we built together, and the betrayal that had shattered it. By evening I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer, felt too suffocating, too full of ghosts. I grabbed my keys and left, driving without a destination in mind. I ended up at a bar on the edge of town, a quiet place where no one knew me. The dim lighting and low hum of conversation were a welcome escape from the silence of my thoughts. I ordered a drink, nursing it slowly as I stared at the glass around me. People laughed and talked, their voices blending into an unintelligible buzz. For a moment I envied their normally. Then my phone buzzed on the bar. I glanced at the screen, my stomach tightening when I saw Emma's name. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen before finally swiping to open the message. "Emma, I know I've hurt you, but I need you to know the full story. Can we talk?" I stared at the message. My emotion is a tangled mess. What more could she possibly say? What full story could make any of this better? I set the phone down, turning back to my drink, but the message lingered in my mind, pulling at me like a thread I couldn't quite unravel. By the time I Finished my second drink. I knew I couldn't ignore her. I needed to hear what she had to say, even if it wouldn't change anything. I called her as I sat in my car, the engine off and the cool night air seeping through the cracked window. She picked up on the second ring. Jack, she said, her voice soft and hesitant. What do you want, Emma? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. I need to explain, she said. I need you to know why this happened. Fine, I said. Explain. There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought she might not answer, but then she spoke, her words careful and measured. It started because I felt lost, she said. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I felt like I wasn't enough, not for you, not for anyone, and when I started therapy it felt like a lifeline. I didn't interrupt, though my grip on the steering wheel tightened at first. Dr. Lang was just my therapist, she continued. But over time I started to depend on him in a way I shouldn't have. I didn't see, and to confront the tangle of emotions that seemed to shift with every passing moment. I couldn't escape the memories. Everywhere I turned there was a reminder of the life we built together, the photo of us on the mantel from our anniversary trip, the throw blanket she always used curled up on the couch, the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the bedroom. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. Thank you. But now those reminders felt like ghosts of a life that no longer existed. I thought about Emma's words, her confession over the phone. Was she right? Had Dr. Lang taken advantage of her vulnerability, or was that just an excuse? A way to soften the weight of her betrayal? The questions gnawed at me, and the only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't move forward without answers. That evening I found myself dialing a number I never thought I'd call again. The receptionist at Dr. Lang's office answered on the second ring, her voice chipper and professional. Lang Psychological Services, how can I help you? This is Jack Turner, I said, keeping my voice steady. I need to speak with Dr. Lang. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her furrowed brow. I'm sorry, Mr. Turner, but Dr. Lang is unavailable right now. Can I take a message? Tell him it's about Emma, I said firmly, and that he owes me an explanation. The line went quiet for a moment. I'll let him know, she said finally. I hung up without saying goodbye, the anger simmering just beneath my skin. To my surprise, the call came less than an hour later. Mr. Turner, Dr. Lang said, his voice calm and composed. You're the last person I want to talk to, I said, cutting straight to the point. But I need to know what the hell you did to my wife. There was a pause. I think you've misunderstood the situation, he said carefully. Don't patronize me, I snapped. Emma told me everything, how you helped her feel, understood how you let things get personal, how you crossed line. Do you deny it? Another pause. Emma was going through a difficult time, he said finally. Therapy can create a unique bond, and sometimes those boundaries can blur, but I assure you I never. Don't lie to me, I interrupted, my voice rising. I saw the way she looked at you, the way you looked at her. You knew exactly what you were doing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mr. Turner, he said quietly, I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you, but my relationship with Emma was always professional. Professional, I barked out, a bitter laugh. Is that what you call showing up in my house, standing in my bedroom with her? You crossed every line there is, and you know it. His voice Hardened. I think this conversation has run its course. I wish you and Emma the best as you work through this. The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me seething. That night I poured myself a drink and stared at the wall, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. Dr. Lang's calmness had felt like an act, his carefully chosen words designed to deflect rather than confront the truth. But one thing was clear: I couldn't trust anything he said. If I wanted real answers, I'd have to get them from Emma. The next day I called her. She answered on the first ring, her voice tentative. "Jack," she said softly. "We need to talk," I said, face to face. "No more excuses, no more half truths, just the full story." She hesitated. "Okay," she said. "Finally, when?" "Tonight," I said. "Come home." When she arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. She looked fragile, like a woman carrying the weight of her own guilt, but I didn't let that soften me. We sat in the living room facing each other, weighed down by the enormity of what had been said and what hadn't. She slept in the guest room, a self-imposed exile that neither of us addressed directly. I didn't stop her, though. The idea of sharing a bed again, of being that close to her, felt impossible. I wasn't ready. A week passed before I agreed to sit down with her again. This time it wasn't for accusations or confessions. It was to decide if there was anything left to salvage. We sat in the kitchen, a pot of untouched coffee between us. Emma looked exhausted, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red. I didn't imagine I looked much better. "I've been thinking," she began hesitantly, her fingers tracing the edge of her mug, "about everything about us." And I prompted, my tone flat, her voice cracked. "I don't want to lose you, Jack. I know I've broken your trust and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I stared at her, the sincerity in her voice undeniable, but sincerity wasn't enough, not after what she'd done. "Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. Thank you. How do you expect me to trust you again?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Every time you leave the house, every time you pick up your phone, how am I supposed to believe you're not hiding something?" She winced, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't expect it to be easy," she said, "but I'm willing to do whatever you need. Transparency, therapy, anything." The word therapy made me flinch. "Not with him," I said sharply. "Never," she said quickly. "I've already reported him to the board. What he did, what we did, it was wrong and he never should have crossed that line." Her admission caught me off guard. "You reported him?" She nodded. "I thought it was the right thing to do. He violated his oath, Jack. He took advantage of me, of my vulnerability. That doesn't excuse my choices, but he shouldn't be allowed to do this to anyone else." For the first time I saw a glimmer of the woman. I fell in love with the woman who took responsibility even when it was hard. We sat in silence for a long time. I didn't know how to respond. My anger had been my anchor for so long that the idea of letting it go felt almost unthinkable. But the truth was, part of me still loved her, and that part of me wanted to believe we could find a way back to each other. "Therapy," I said finally. "Not with him, obviously, but if we're going to try, we need help." She nodded, her relief palpable. "I'll make the arrangements." "And transparency," I added. "No more secrets, no more lies. If I ask where you are, I need to know. If you're uncomfortable with that, then we're done." "I understand," she said softly. I leaned back in my chair. Exhaustion washing over me. This isn't a promise, I said. I don't know if I can forgive you, Emma. I don't even know if I want to, but if we're going to try, you need to understand that it's going to take time, a lot of time. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. I'll wait as long as it takes. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept in our bed alone. The guest room was still hers, at least for now, but it felt like a step one that I wasn't sure I was ready for, but one I needed to take. The next few weeks were a blur of therapy sessions and awkward conversations. We both committed to the process, though it wasn't easy. Every session felt like reopening a wound, peeling back layers of resentment and hurt that neither of us had fully acknowledged. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the weight of what had happened felt too heavy to bear. But then there were other moments, small, fleeting moments, when I saw glimpses of the love we once shared. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to make me consider the future. One night, after a particularly intense therapy session, Emma sat across from me in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, the question hanging heavy in the air. No, I said finally, I don't think we'll ever be the same. Her face crumpled, but I held up a hand, stopping her. But that doesn't mean we can't build something new, I added. Something better, maybe, if we're both willing to try. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I am, she whispered as I sat there watching her. I realized I wasn't sure what the future held. Rebuilding wouldn't be easy, and the scars of her betrayal would never fully heal, but maybe, just maybe, we could learn to live with them. Only time would tell. Weeks turned into months, and the initial shock of Emma's betrayal began to fade. Not because it hurt any less, but because I was slowly learning how to live with it. Every day brought new challenges. Some days I felt like we were making progress, like we might actually be able to rebuild what we'd lost. Other days the weight of her choices felt like an anchor pulling me under. Therapy helped. We went twice a week, sitting across from a new counselor who seemed determined to guide us through the storm. Emma was open, painfully so, laying bare her insecurities and regrets in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time, I began to understand the depth of her struggles, the feelings of inadequacy, the walls she'd built around herself to keep from crumbling. Understanding didn't erase my anger, but it softened it. I too had to confront uncomfortable truths about myself, about the ways I had unknowingly contributed to the distance between us. It wasn't easy to admit, but there were moments when I had been absent, too focused on work or my own frustrations to notice hers. Our counselor told us healing wasn't linear, that there would be setbacks and doubts. She was right. One night, months into the process, Emma and I sat on the couch together for the first time in what felt like forever. The television played in the background, but neither of us was really watching. I know I've said this before, she began, hesitantly breaking the silence, but I want you to know how truly sorry I am for everything. I turned to her face etched with vulnerability. I know, I said quietly, but it's not just about saying you're sorry, Emma, about showing it every day. I will, she promised, her voice trembling. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you if that's what it takes. I nodded, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to tell her that I believed her not yet. The hardest part was learning to trust again. It wasn't just about knowing where she was or who she was with. It was about believing that she was committed to us, to rebuilding the life we had. She made an effort, though. She left her phone unlocked, her messages open for me to see. She shared her schedule without hesitation, even inviting me to join her for things she used to do alone. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when I found myself questioning her every move, but slowly those moments grew fewer and farther between. One day I came home to find her in the garden, her hands covered in soil, as she worked on the flower bed we had planted together years ago. It was one of the few projects we had tackled as a team, and seeing her there brought back a wave of memories. She looked up as I approached, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Hey, she said, her smile tentative. What are you doing? I asked, gesturing to the trowel in her hand. Fixing this, she said simply. It's been neglected for too long. I nodded, my throat tightening. The metaphor wasn't lost on me that night as we sat at the dinner table. I found myself staring at her, searching her face for the woman I had fallen in love with. She wasn't the same, but neither was I. We had both been changed by what had happened, scarred in ways that would never fully heal. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. Thank you. But maybe that was okay. A year after the affair came to light, Emma and I celebrated our anniversary not with a big dinner or an elaborate trip, but with a quiet night at home. We cooked together, laughed over old memories, and for the first time in a long time it felt normal. As we sat on the back porch watching the stars, she reached for my hand. Do you think we'll make it? She asked softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at her, at the woman who had broken my heart and was now working so hard to piece it back together. I don't know, I admitted, but I think we're giving it a hell of a shot. She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. That's all I can ask, for the road ahead was still long, and the scars of the past would never fully fade. But as I sat there with Emma, her hand warm in mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward together. Months passed, and the wounds that had once felt fresh and gaping began to scab over. The pain didn't vanish, it lingered like a dull ache, a reminder of everything we'd been through. But somewhere along the way I stopped letting it consume me. Emma and I were finding a rhythm again, though it was a tentative, careful one. The life we were rebuilding wasn't the same as before, and it never would be, but it didn't need to be. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon. We had agreed to do a project together, something nothing simple but symbolic. The flower bed we had started to fix months ago was thriving now, full of vibrant blooms that seemed to mirror the slow resurgence of something between us. I was thinking, Emma said, crouched beside me as she patted the soil around a new plant. We should build a bench here, a place where we can sit together. I glanced at her, surprised. A bench, she nodded, her smile small but genuine. Yeah, something we can make ourselves. I think it would be nice to have something we built together. Her Words hung in the air heavy with meaning. Okay, I said, finally, let's do it. The project became more than just building a bench. It became a way for us to reconnect, to talk, to laugh in a way we hadn't for a long time. As we measured and sawed and sanded, I found myself looking at Emma with new eyes. She wasn't the same woman I had married, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. She had changed. And so had I. What mattered was that she was trying, really trying to make things right. When the bench was finished, we placed it in the garden. Its simple wooden frame nestled among the flowers. It's perfect, Emma said, running her hand along the smooth surface. It's not perfect, I said, smirking at the slightly uneven legs. She laughed, a sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Maybe not, she said, but it's ours. The first time we sat on the bench together, it felt almost ceremonial. We didn't talk much. There was something sacred about the silence, the way the evening light bathed the garden in gold. After a while, Emma reached for my hand. Her touch was hesitant, like she wasn't sure if it was okay. I didn't pull away. No, it'll take time, she said softly, but I want you to know I'll keep fighting for us for as long as it takes. I looked at her, the sincerity in her eyes undeniable. I know, I said, and I'll keep trying to. Not every day was easy. There were still moments when the memories crept in uninvited and unwelcome, but they came less often now, and when they did, I found it easier to push them aside. We continued therapy, though less frequently as time went on. Our counselor reminded us that progress wasn't about erasing the past, but learning how to live with it. You can't undo what's been done, she said during one session, but you can decide what comes next. That idea became our mantra. One evening, about a year and a half after the affair came to light, Emma surprised me. We were sitting on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, when she pulled a small box from her pocket. What's this? I asked, taking it from her. Open it, she said, her smile nervous. Inside was a key, a new one, engraved with the initials JN. It's for a cabin, she said. I've been saving for it for a while. The small, just a little place by the lake, somewhere we can go to get away, to focus on us. I stared at the key, a lump forming in my throat. You bought us a cabin, she nodded, her smile tentative. I thought it could be a fresh start, a place where we could build new memories. Only if you want to, though. I looked at her, at the woman who had hurt me more than I ever thought possible, but who had also fought to rebuild what we'd lost. Let's see it, I said, my voice soft. The cabin became our sanctuary. It wasn't fancy, just a modest little place surrounded by trees and water, but it was ours, and every time we went there it felt like another step forward. We filled it with laughter, with quiet moments, with plans for the future. It didn't erase the past, but it gave us something to look toward, a new path to walk together. One evening, as we sat on the porch of the cabin watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emma leaned against me. Do you think we made it? She asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. I think we're getting there, I said. She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. That's all I need. The scars of the past would always be there, faint but indelible. But as I sat there with Emma, her warmth against me, I realized something. Scars didn't have to define us. They could be a reminder of what we'd overcome, and of the strength it took to Move forward together. The morning air at the cabin was crisp, filled with the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional call of birds. I stood on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in my hands, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years, a kind of quiet that felt earned and not given. Inside I could hear Emma humming as she moved about the kitchen. The sound was faint, but it carried a warmth that I hadn't realized. I missed this place, this moment. It wasn't the life we had before, but it was ours now, and that was enough. Later that day we decided to take the canoe out onto the lake. It was a small, rickety thing we'd found in the cabin's shed. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. Thank you. Its paint faded and chipped. Emma had laughed when she first saw it, calling it a death trap, but we'd managed to patch it up together as we paddled out. The water mirrored the sky in perfect stillness. The quiet was companionable, a reflection of how far we'd come. It's beautiful out here, Emma said, her voice soft. I nodded. Why? Watching the sunlight dance on the surface of the water. It is. She paused, dipping her hand into the lake. Do you ever think about where we'd be if this hadn't happened? The question caught me off guard. I rested my paddle across my lap, considering my answer. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe we'd still be living that life we thought was perfect. Or maybe it would have fallen apart in a different way. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Do you think this made us stronger? I met her gaze, the weight of her question settling over me. I think it made us different, I said, and maybe that's not a bad thing. We're learning to be better, Emma, and that's more than I thought we'd ever do. She smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I'll never stop being sorry, Jack, but I'm grateful that you gave us a second chance. It wasn't just me, I said quietly. As the months turned into another year, the cabin became a refuge, a place where we could escape the noise of the outside world and focus on each other. Slowly but surely we began to build new memories, ones untainted by the pain of the past, but the scars were still there. They always would be there. Were days when doubt crept in, moments when a stray thought or memory would bring the pain rushing back, but those moments grew rarer, and when they came we faced them together. On our second trip to the cabin, Emma brought a journal. She didn't tell me about it at first, but one evening as we sat by the fire, she handed it to me. What's this? I asked, flipping through the pages. Letters, she said, her voice hesitant. To you, to us, to the person I used to be. I looked at her, my brow furrowing. You wrote all this? She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It was part of my therapy. I wasn't sure if I should share it with you, but I want you to see how far I've come, how far we've come. I spent hours reading those pages, her words raw and unfiltered. She wrote about her pain, her guilt, her hope. She wrote about me, about how much she loved me and how much she regretted ever hurting me. By the time I closed the journal, my eyes were wet with tears. You're braver than I thought, I said, my voice thick. She smiled faintly. You're stronger than I thought, she replied. We weren't perfect, we never would be, but we were learning, growing, rebuilding something that against all odds felt worth saving. And as I sat beside Emma, the fur light casting a warm glow over her face, I realized something I wasn't Just moving forward with her I was. Moving forward for myself, for the person I wanted to be. The past would always be a part of us, but it didn't define us. We defined us as the fire crackled and the stars filled the sky above the cabin. Emma reached for my hand. I didn't hesitate this time. Together we sat in the quiet, letting the future unfold one moment at a time.